It scares me to this day that my UFC career or my fighting career at any point could end. It scares the hell out of me that one day I may have to go back on a building site or applying for jobs that I don't want to do. The biggest thing that I wish someone had told me earlier when I joined the UFC, and I was very fortunate that I've got good parents and I've got good people around me. Brad Pickett, for example, who's in the UFC, who knows how to obviously deal with money and how it's paid. But I wish someone kind of spoke about the finances a little bit better with me when joining the UFC. I get paid well. I'm happy with my money. Obviously, everyone would always want more money, of course, but I don't, criticize the UFC because they're not paying me hundreds of millions of pounds like Jake Paul or whoever these boxers are that people always complain about. But for me, it's how to be sensible with your money, because in the UFC, you get paid in chunks. My UFC debut, I got $10,000 to fight, 10 if I win, and I was lucky that I got the $50,000 bonus. Now, straight away I thought, well, I've got $70,000 coming. It's not $70,000 because you've got to deduct the dollars to pounds, which obviously in England's a lot less. You've got the tax, which, let's hope that you understand taxes, because otherwise you're going to owe the tax man a lot of money. You've got your manager's percentage, etc., etc. So anyway, the money comes down. I thought I had $70,000 coming into my bank. When I saw it, it was about, let's say, £10,000 for the fight. And then the bonus came in about 6 weeks later, which was £33,000. Now I was sitting there looking at £40,000 in my bank, and I've never had more than about £300. So to me, it would have been very easy to just go and spunk this money. I could go to Selfridges and buy all the designer gear that I want. I could go and buy a new car. I could go and take the girlfriend at the time. I could go and take her to wherever she wants to go. But I was very smart and clever that I knew I shouldn't have done that. And soon you see the money dip, because obviously you don't fight every month. You don't fight every 2 months. There was 2 years that I was out once and I was having to drip feed my money. So it scares me to this day that my UFC career or my fighting career at any point could end. God forbid a bad injury, something gets in the way, you are no longer fighting, which means you're no longer earning money. And your sponsors, I'm pretty sure, aren't going to sponsor you unless you're competing. That is something that I hope the UFC maybe would do in the future with up and coming athletes, people that maybe don't have good people around them, people that are in their ear maybe saying, go and spend the money, go and get loads of alcohol and live like a rock star for a few months, because it can end very quickly. You've got NFL players that are going broke and they earn a lot more than we do. So yeah, I'm 31 now. I still feel like I've got many years left in the game, but it scares the hell out of me that one day I may have to go back on a building site, or, I may be applying for jobs that I don't want to do because I can't fight anymore, or because I had too many losses on the trot. A couple of losses in the UFC, you might get cut. There's not as many promotions that are paying a lot of money like the UFC. So yeah, I think fighters should be very wise with their money. I think whilst you're in the limelight, you should build brands, which is yourself as well. Yourself is a brand. I myself have started 2 businesses, which is the Prospect Academy, which is an app for online training, tutorials. We chat with our students on there, and it's £10 a month, which in dollars is probably about $13. So, I'm trying to make something that would, I think, benefit the world. And for me, this app is what will benefit people that don't necessarily get right training. Maybe they're too nervous to join the gym, things like that. Trying to get the world in a fitter, healthier shape. Then I've got the Prospect Apparel, which is the clothing I'm wearing now. And again, these 2 businesses aren't making me money. They're not. If anything, I'm losing money on them because it's a lot of money to put into business. But I know that I need to be sensible with my money, and I need to create things and plant seeds that later on in life may, come to fruition. If I can be earning a wage off my businesses by the time I end my career, I'll be very happy, because as I say, I don't want to go back on a building site. It's not for me. I don't want to have to go and apply for jobs that I hate to do. I've got kids to look after, I've got a wife, I've got a mortgage, and you know what the UK is like, it's very expensive. So I think the main thing that I would like the UFC to do for future athletes is teach them about finances, teach them about things that they may have not been taught. I'd like to think that I'm pretty switched on. Some fighters may not be. We're fighters at the end of the day. We're not the smartest bunch. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most important things I would say that I wish I knew more about at the start of my career. I think a lot of the things that maybe fighters should have been told are really basic. And it's not the UFC's position to say, you know, also going back to finances, it's not for the UFC to come up to me and say, Nath, I hope you know that you've got to pay your taxes, and I hope you know that you've got, you know, things to pay for, and you don't know when your next fight is, and if you get injured, whatnot. But it is something that I think is very important for fighters to understand. And hopefully this video now will give up and coming fighters who, you know, want to be in the UFC one day a little heads up on some things that you may want to take into consideration. And for me, jet lag and traveling whilst weight cutting was a big one. So when I had my debut in New York, I did get the heads up from coaches, but things that people probably forget about is jet lag, for one. You know, the UFC, they check us in on the Tuesday. Well, if you're fighting on the Saturday, that's only a few nights to try and get jet lag out of the way. Now, I can't speak for everyone, but for me, it does affect me. You know, if I go to New York or the States, you know, there's a time difference, there's the flights, also you're cutting weight. So good luck getting a good night's sleep when you're cutting hard weight. And that does take its toll. You know, you get to New York and the last thing you want to do is go and get in the gym and train and sweat when, you know, potentially you've not had any sleep. You've got no calories in you. Those things, I think a good coach would give their fighters the heads up, but it's not something that I was told about. You know, it's not something that when you sign your contract at the bottom, it says, don't forget, you got jet lag, you got this. Check-in for the UFC is on a Tuesday. So they cover the hotel, the flights for me and one cornerman. Your other two cornermen, if you want to, you have to pay for. And I see a lot of fighters that are traveling and they can't afford necessarily to pay for their other coaches to go. I've always made sure that I've had 3 cornermen, and it's more of a respect out of my coaches. You know, my coaches don't take a lot of money from me. So my little way of giving back is, I would like you to come with me. I'd like to pay for your flight. I'd like to pay for your accommodation. But yeah, only one person and the fighter is covered, and that's from the Tuesday. On my fight against John Dodson, it was at high altitude. So we went, I would say it was about 13 nights, 12 nights before. I had to pay obviously for the hotel accommodation, which wasn't from the Tuesday onwards. I had to pay for the flights for my cornerman. You know, all of those sort of things aren't necessarily included. And again, you know, I'm not saying that it's for the UFC to pay for, because if I want to go to a fight a month early and acclimatise, that's my choice. You know, it's not necessarily down to them to pay, but these are things that fighters need to take into consideration. You know, if you're paying for 2 cornermen's flights, accommodation, etc., you know, somewhere like Vegas, it could be £5,000, you know, in total with everything, the food, unless you're making your coaches pay for their own food. There can be little hidden things that, you know, creep up on you, and when you get home and you realise, okay, I didn't realise I had to spend £5,000 or whatever it is, you know, it kind of hurts a little bit. But as I say, I was very lucky that my coach, Brad Pickett, had already been in the UFC, so he'd already given me a heads up with things like this. You know, you're only getting one cornerman paid for, etc. So I was very fortunate, but I know there's a lot of fighters out there that aren't necessarily getting the advice or the things said to them that they need.
How dangerous would you say it is for a fighter to take a late notice fight?
So taking a short notice fight is very risky, of course, but it's also sometimes an opportunity arises and you have to take it, you know. So I know a lot of people that have taken the Dana White Contender Series and a UFC debut on short notice, and sometimes have fell short. Sometimes they come on top. I think a big thing is if it was me personally, I would find out what the fighter's mentality is like. Are they someone that is game and can just fight on any given day? Or are they someone that needs an 8-week camp, 10-week camp, etc.? You know, I've taken short notice fights before, which I would say I had about 4 or 5 weeks notice and I won. But at the time I was already pretty fit. You know, I'd already done training. So that's a big thing I would ask is, how long's the fighter been training for? Have they been staying ready? As McGregor said, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. If we go to Jordan Vachenik, you know, he took, I think it was a week or 2 weeks, was doing really well. Unfortunately, fell short, you know, lost the decision, but against a credible opponent. I think the UFC obviously would respect what he'd done there, and I think he's going to have a very successful career in the UFC. So sometimes you do have to just take the opportunity when it comes, and sometimes you may fall short, but in the long run, you know, it's better to take that than miss it. Another thing that I wish I kind of knew earlier in my career is that, you know, you get signed by the UFC is a massive thing, but you're a small fish in a massive pond. And how I mean by that is, when I was fighting on Cage Warriors, I was the champ. I had Graham Boylan's number, I had Ian Dean's number. It was very simple. I could text the promoter and say, when are we fighting? What's going on? What's the filming process? When am I getting, you know, promos done, etc. You're the big fish. When you get to the UFC, you're at the bottom of the pile, you know. So going to the UFC was a bit like, who do I talk to, for starters? Because you're not going to the UFC and just dealing straight away with Dana White. You know, Dana White's potentially up here. You have people below him and then below them. And sometimes you can get very lost with who you're talking to. So again, going back to Brad Pickett, you know, I was very fortunate that when I went with Brad, he was introducing me to people, and it's very important because at the end of the day, you don't know who you're talking to. And there could be fighters out there that, you know, may come across rude. And if you're coming across rude to the wrong people, that's not going to do you any favors. Obviously, I'm not a rude type of person anyway. So usually the people I'm talking to, I'm very friendly and, you know, very happy anyway. So I don't really have any trouble with that. But I have heard rumors of fighters kind of, you know, rubbing people up the wrong way, which is never going to help with your career. Just like if you went for a job interview and you spoke to someone rudely that was high up, you know, you're not going to go very far. So that's a big thing that I would say, that I think, you know, be ready to be the small fish, to not know who you're talking to necessarily, and to have to wait. You know, you can't necessarily get answers straight away. So even now, you know, my manager has to approach the UFC matchmakers. The UFC matchmakers, I don't know if they have to discuss it amongst them or whether it's a one man's job kind of thing. Obviously, they have to go and find an opponent, come back to your manager, hope that your manager then talks to you and says, this is who I've got. And it's a little bit more of a longer process. And I guess that's the perks of it being the biggest promotion in the world.
Yes, guys, have you wanted to train with a world-class UFC fight team? Not just any team, my team, all for the price of a coffee? Now you can. At Prospect Academy, we're not just doing tutorials with my boxing coach, jiu-jitsu coach, strength conditioning coach, yoga, sports physio, you name it, we've got it. We're also doing giveaways, competitions, exclusive discount codes, and many more perks of being a member. Join now at Prospect Academy.